watching a video presentation of George Washington. If you're watching at home and this maybe isn't as clear as you would like it, you can always look it up on YouTube. It is George Washington Forging a Nation. And you might be able to get a more clear picture there. But here we go today. Remember what has just happened in our last episode. We haven't seen very much so far. What's just happened?
Virginia ratified.
Virginia ratified the Constitution, which was essential. Why? Because there weren't enough states before. It was one of the larger states. There were enough states prior to this, but Virginia was important to be a part of this new union. And of course, Washington knows that if Virginia ratifies, and we do have a country now, the United States, under the Constitution, that he will be called upon to serve. And who is it that comes to give him the news? The three gentlemen. We see two of them here. Anybody remember who this one is?
Yeah.
Edmund.
Edmund.
It's his first name. You don't know him well enough to call him by his first name now. He's the governor of Virginia at the time.
Edmund
Randolph.
Randolph.
You're close. Edmund Randolph. And this is
James Monroe.
Madison.
James Madison.
James Madison.
And the other man was James Monroe.
Oh. Oh, they both start with James. Okay.
The Europeans predict we'll tear ourselves apart like wild animals. But New York and South Carolina all threaten not to join the Union. Only George Washington, as president, can make us one nation.
Okay, why did he ponder there? Why does it show him just kind of not saying anything?
Thinking.
Why is he thinking?
He's like, wow, my nation, well, this nation is really depending on me right now. Even though I do want
And
to
how does he feel about that?
kind of sad because he wanted to like stay in Mount Vernon.
Yeah,
It's sort of like I have to do it.
right.
It's my duty.
It's a duty one I would not rather have, but he's willing to do it, right? Now, there were those that at the end of the war wanted for George Washington to simply step into the role of being king. In fact, his officers in the army drafted a proposal just to that effect that he would take over, and he told them absolutely not. So he was not interested in power. And George III of England made a comment to that effect. I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but it was if George Washington doesn't take over as a king, then he is a great man. So he's willing to do it, though, even though he knows that it is not something he desires to do. Okay, let's continue now.
Don't worry, sir. The horses will clear a path. I don't want anyone hurt. I'll walk. But, sir, you'll never make it to the president's house from this mob. I got it. Thomas James, Mr. President. I can't tell you how anxious I have been awaiting your arrival. I suppose that you weren't aware of just how much I needed you here.
I am here, sir, only because of you. I'd serve no other man in such a task.
May I congratulate you on your daughter's marriage?
Thank you, Mr. President. I shall miss her, but I have my little Polly to raise. She'll be my comfort now.
They told me you were here. For years, I've looked forward to meeting the man who wrote the Declaration. You're a legend in your own time, Mr. Jefferson.
Alexander Hamilton.
Aha! You exaggerate my eminence, sir. I'm equally honored to meet you.
Look, you two gentlemen care to adjourn this mutual admiration society long enough for a brandy? How fortunate I am to have two such remarkable men at my service. You see before you an aging general who, with your help, will learn as I go to be a president. To my Secretary of State, Mr. Jefferson, and my Secretary of Treasury, Mr. Hamilton. To the three of us. May the nation grow and prosper under our benevolent intentions. Good evening, sir. Golly, my dear.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Good night, Mrs. Washington. Mr. President.
Good night. Thank you.
Listen to me. I trust they still hail him as their savior after they learn of my financial plan. Make sure no one reveals the details before we present it to the Congress.
Alex, cousin, I'm deputy. You know I'll be vigilant. Don't worry. The president's prestige will carry your plan through Congress with flying colors. Good night, my friend.
Good night, William. Damn it, at least wait till he gets round the corner.
I couldn't wait, sir.
Is he good or bad?
Better than good, Mr. Reynolds. The man has revealed to me his complete financial system and the data presented to Congress.
One of the mainsprings is redemption at face value of the certificates issued as money by the Continental Congress during the war. Mr. Hamilton hopes this will give stability to the new federal government.
So fat now versus first, eh, sir?
You will have less than a month to gallop through the backcountry and buy up those certificates. Little tongue oil should get them dirt cheap. The ex-soldiers already think they're all but worthless.
I'll be on the road before double.
Sir, I appreciate this. You won't regret it.
All right, let me explain what's going on here. Part of Hamilton's financial plan was to take care of all those soldiers that had fought during the war who had not been paid. They had been given certificates, sort of IOUs from the government, that they would be paid someday, but nothing had been done yet. And Hamilton felt that the government had an obligation to pay those debts. And so part of his financial plan was to redeem those certificates, that is, to pay them with a face value. Whatever it said on the certificate was owed to the person holding it would be paid. Now, the soldiers that were scattered throughout the country, back in the countryside, as they mentioned, had no idea that this was going to happen. And so if somebody comes along and offers them money for a certificate that they think is worthless, what will they do? They'll take the money and give them their certificate. Take money much less than what the certificate says. And then what happens when Congress approves paying for all those certificates? They're not paying the soldiers, they're paying all the people that bought up the certificates. And so these speculators can make a lot of money. You follow the plan? It was contingent upon Hamilton's cousin, who is his also his deputy, knowing the plan ahead of time and then putting into operation a scheme by which to get as many of those certificates as possible and then make a killing on it. Does everybody follow? Any questions as to what they're doing? Is it ethical? No. And is it legal? Yeah. There's no law against giving money to somebody who has a certificate, and Congress would then have to pay the holder. They can't figure out who originally held it, which is that's going to come up later. So it's legal, but certainly unethical.
I'm not sure this is wise, sir. Wise? The Constitution requires that the President seek out the advice and consent of the Senate on treaties. What could be the harm of going there in person?
Many of their debates have been marked by anger.
Yes, well, perhaps we can bring a little harmony to our senators. That's very good.
I'm not so sure Congress feels as charitable towards the President either. They certainly took their time approving their heads of departments.
Don't get me started on that again.
Oh, they should have jumped for joy to have men like Randolph and Hamilton and Jefferson.
And you, Mr. Secretary of War.
I'm afraid that some senators denounced the new government as a plot to establish a monarchy, to trap and destroy the people's liberty.
Yes, well, thank you for your cheerful reminder, General Knox. It makes me feel like, actually it makes me feel like Daniel about to enter the lines then.
Motion is so.
All right, so who was that riding with him? Henry Knox, who was his first Secretary of War, was one of the two cabinet positions that were there. Knox is always portrayed as having a bandage on of some kind, so apparently he was always injuring himself. I'm not sure what the story behind that is. All right, so he's going to the Senate because the Constitution says that when the president establishes treaties with other nations, but it's with the advice and consent of the Senate. That's what it says. Not sure exactly what that means, but Washington interprets it as being that he goes to the Senate and presents the treaty that he has worked out and would hear advice from them and probably consent from them. That's what he envisions is going to happen. So we'll see what really takes place.
Okay. Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. President of the Senate, fellow members, I propose a tax on every slave that's imported into the United States, since it is the great defect of our new Constitution that it suffers such a vile business to go on.
Virginia speaks so piously. She has all the slaves she needs. But the slave trade is the lifeblood of the lower South. Now, if Virginia thinks slavery such an evil institution, then let her begin by freeing her own slaves.
Gentlemen, your forbearance. President Washington has arrived. Mr. Vice President, gentlemen of the Senate, please.
Okay, now if you know your Constitution, you know that the presiding officer or the president of the Senate holds what other office? Vice President of the United States. Who is the Vice President of the United States under Washington?
John Adams.
John Adams. So John Adams is presiding over the Senate at this point.
I have drafted instructions for the commission, which I have appointed with your approval, to negotiate a treaty with the Southern Indians. The President of the Senate would kindly read the preamble. I would thereafter be grateful for your advice and consent. The treaty with the...
Look at him. He's taking our vice president's chair. He needs to tread on the necks of the Senate.
On behalf of the said states,
and the undersigned kings, chiefs, and warriors of the Greek nation of Indians on the part and behalf of the said nation.
What are you saying? About Indians?
There shall
Louder,
be
sir.
perpetual peace and friendship.
Louder! I can't hear you.
Article 1. There shall be perpetual peace and friendship between all the citizens of the United States of America and all the individuals, towns, and tribes of the
Yeah, this is a flim-flam, sir. We must have that treaty in our hands to read at leisure. Chances there for a fair investigation on the President of the United States there on the dais like a pasha with his Secretary of War there to support his opinions. The great man intends to overawe the timid and neutral hearts of the Senate.
This treaty is of crucial concern to Georgia. And in the name of that great state, I would propose that we postpone this matter till Monday.
I move that this treaty be submitted to a committee for study. I move that we defer action until further study.
This defeats the very purpose of my coming.
The General Washington's out. I'll be damned if I'll ever go there again.
And he never did.
Easy on that. It makes you a little crazy. You expect me to. I trusted you.
I think he is. The holy of the Mount Virginians.
I borrowed to invest in those certificates, and that bloody Congress still refuses to pass Hamilton's plan to fund the debt. Prices on the damn script bounce up and down on every rumor. I can't even decide when to cut my losses and sell out. Calm down. With a cell in debtor's prison waiting for me.
You've had enough, and I've had enough of your sniveling. I, too, have my fortune certificates. Just hold on for a little while more. Hamilton will persuade that Congress yet. I know the man.
That's nice.
Any questions about what's happening here? Besides the catching up of the internet? Okay, is there something I can do to speed that along?
Are you on secure?
Experiencing interruptions.
Are you on Heartland's open Wi-Fi or secure?
Probably secure.
You switch it.
Open's a lot better.
It's kind of defeats the purpose of having it secure.
Well, that's the Wi-Fi people. Come on, man. Come on, man. Hey, come on.
All in all, it's not working.
Yes,
I, too, have my fortune. Just hold on for a little while more. Hamilton will persuade that Congress yet. I know the man.
If you back it up and pause it.
That's the
Just hold on for a little
I know the man.
while more. Hamilton will persuade that Congress yet. I know the man.
Oh. Does it say you're connected on your laptop screen? Bottom right.
Where is that?
I didn't.
No, I didn't.
Remind me after. I'm not. I would just unless you want to.
Look at them. Money sharks. Sweating and feeling dark corners.
I still believe Mr. Hamilton's plan for the payment of war debts is a sound one. Mr. Monroe, you cannot blame him for this epidemic.
I've always admired the man, for I've not worked so closely with the ratified Constitution. But now,
What's his duty doing in such company?
he may be trying to control more extreme speculation.
Gentlemen, we cannot lose faith in Hamilton overnight. Give him the benefit of the doubt.
And had Monroe investigate rumors that speculators are taking advantage of inside knowledge.
Sportsmen in every state have galloped over country roads trying to buy up as many certificates as possible before the farmer and the ex-soldier who burned them with their sweat and their blood discovered that they might suddenly become much more valuable.
My God, I'll not stand for it.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Gentlemen, I would like to introduce, instead of Mr. Hamilton's redemption of certificate scheme, an alternative bill which provides that only some of the value of the certificates be paid to the present holder and the rest to the original holder.
That's fiscal heresy.
That, sir, is exactly what many of these so-called speculators, I call them blood-sucking vipers, have done to our poor ex-soldiers. My bill, I submit, is a plea for human justice to those who sacrificed so much to bring this nation to birth.
Mr. Madison, I've just heard of your proposal. I beg you, sir, in view of our friendship, to withdraw your bill before it comes to a vote.
Mr. Hamilton, I cannot.
Dutch bankers have invested in the certificates. If the government's promise to pay the current owner is not honored, the United States credit abroad will be destroyed.
What do Dutch bankers mean to me? Did they fight to make this nation free?
But how in God's name will we ever identify the original holder? It would be folly to try and murderously expensive.
What's one man's folly is another man's justice.
Call them what you will. They take risks. They pour their profits into new enterprises, which, in the long view, will help the poor farmer more than a few acres or a new bed.
When you can charm a bear from his honey, that you can't stop your own deputy from consulting with those who would profit from your funding scheme.
William Dewey is an honorable man. If you have any proof,
One does not need proof to know the pig is at the trough. One can smell it.
I resent that.
Present it all you like, sir. But justice to the many takes precedence over any grandiose scheme to create wealth for the few. I will not withdraw my bill, Mr. Hamilton, and that is my final word. For him.
Sir, I don't like you at all.
Nevertheless, as Treasury Secretary, if I should order an investigation of uncontrolled speculation, will it uncover any activity of yours which might compromise not only you, but inevitably me and my entire financial program?
No, of course not. Why do you cross-examine me like this? You're supposed to be my friend.
Which is why I'm going to suggest that you consider resigning.
Sir,
My sources tell me that Mr. Madison, as the new leader of the House, is investigating you. My God, if you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about. If you're not, indeed, call on God to help you, for I will.
I'm blameless.
Good.
I swear.
I need no distractions if I'm to defeat Madison.
Announce the final vote.
How
Bill 61, Mr. Madison's plan has failed to carry by a vote of 29 to 21.
Next order of business, Mr. Speaker. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York. Sir, on behalf of the Treasury Secretary, I hereby propose passage of what Mr. Hamilton has called assumption. The federal government will take over all war debts still unpaid by the states.
I understand your outrage. Virginia has cleared up most of its war debts, and in effect, we would have to pay twice. But I caution you to give Mr. Hamilton a fair hearing.
Oh, for God's sake, don't you think I have?
There must be some way you can impose your differences.
The president needs to tell me again that the president wants harmony. He can't have it. Not when a principle is at issue. Your Treasury Secretary wants not only to increase federal control, but to virtually eliminate states' rights. He can no longer pretend to be Virginia's friend. Nor mine.
Ooh. All right, so this is called assumption. During the war, the states were responsible for their own debts, and incurring debts and then having to pay for them. And most of the states had not paid their debts from the war. That was an ongoing problem with other countries from whom they borrowed possibly from, just for a solvency of the government. And so Hamilton came up with a plan for the United States government to assume the debts of the states. Well, Virginia had paid most of her debts. And so that meant that the taxes coming from Virginia would be used, along with everybody else's, to pay the debts of states who hadn't paid any of theirs. And so that's why he's saying Virginians would be paying twice. We already paid our debts, and now we're helping to pay other people's debts. You understand the issue there? But that was part of Hamilton's plan. First of all, pay the face value of the certificates that are out there, and then this idea of assumption, where the United States government would assume the debts, in other words, take over the debts of the states.
Urgent, Christopher, the president must be forewarned. Sir, I had hoped to spare you, but now the whispers have started. There's a serious breach with Madison that could destroy the Treasury's entire fiscal plan.
Yes, I agree.
We must do away with the state's 13 conflicting systems of finance.
Yes, I know.
Only a central authority can pay public creditors and restore public confidence in the government.
I'll talk to him, Mr. Hamilton.
Sir, I didn't mean to upset you.
Well, I am upset, Mr. Hamilton, that both you and Madison for not coming to me with this sooner. Now that it's public knowledge, you both played to the outrage. It'll make this breach even more impossible to.
All right, that conversation there almost seems incongruous with what we've seen so far. What it looks like is that Madison and Washington are enemies, kind of the way things have been portrayed. Here, it sounds as though Washington is a friend of Madison's, and that he would have expected Madison and Hamilton both to come to him. That's more the reality. In fact, Madison visited Washington on a regular basis during his first term. They communicated quite a lot. And that's not reflected very much here in this movie for the purpose of creating tension, I suppose. But Madison and Washington did have a good relationship.
Yes, I am. Jesus,
Forgive me, Mr. President.
open your legs, sir. Providence hasn't failed. Mrs. Washington, you'll have to leave.
How is it? Almost gone. I'm going to try to cut out the carbuncle, but it's very doubtful.
Carbuncle will be a tumor in his leg. No anesthetics back then.
Oh, lay it open a little wider. Lower the hip. Tumors a little deeper than we thought. Can get going. Take more time and be more painful. Mr. President.
Having surgery without anesthetic.
Safer. Get all of it. Yeah.
What? Just a bit now.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
That's it.
That's how he died.
And the story you didn't know about George Washington, he actually did die in office his first term. It was an imposter that took his place after that. In order to keep it going. Of course not. But we'll have imagine how painful that would have been, and not only during the surgery, but even afterwards too. They went through quite a lot there. All right, we'll come back tomorrow, and we're going to see some increasing tension between Hamilton and Jefferson. Any comments?
I'm so